Welcome again to my channel. This is Trev from Trevessence, and today we are going to continue the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. For those of you who have been here with me, I am sincerely grateful for you who have come in and listened to me read, or have gone back after the lives have been over and listened to the reading. And to all my returning travelers, I want to say thank you for your continued support. Well, guys, today, last night the time changed, so we sort of jumped an hour ahead, and that kind of threw everything out of whack. But the days go on, and so do we. So let us begin with chapter 12. For those of you who were here yesterday, or those of you who weren't, let me just remind you where we are in the book. So, in the end of yesterday's reading, Clara was in the bank. Time to close up. The boss Eddie, you'll remember Eddie. So Eddie let out the other two employees and kept Clara back in the bank, trying to tell Clara about how he wanted to marry her. And at the same time, Amos and Drake were outside. Drake was actually waiting for Clara outside. He had found out where she worked, and so he was waiting for her outside. And so, as Eddie was inside being inappropriate with her, he went to the bank door, banged on the door. When Eddie opened the door, he went in, dragged Clara, rescued Clara. Again, that was a second rescue, because remember, the first time he rescued her when the car broke down. So now he rescued her again. And that's where we ended the story yesterday. So today we are going to move on to chapter 12. What was all that about? Clara walked beside Drake as they made their way from the bank. Her heart raced. She couldn't believe what had happened, that she was no longer with Eddie, trapped behind a locked door. For an instant, she wondered what the consequences might be, worrying that she could even be fired. But Clara quickly put that out of her mind. All that mattered was that she was safe. Buenos días, mi amor, ¿cómo está? It's always a pleasure to see you, my love. It was nothing, she fibbed. That didn't look like nothing to me. What are you doing here? Clara said, desperate to change the topic. I thought you were leaving town. I was supposed to, Drake admitted, but things changed a bit unexpectedly. I can't say for certain how much longer I'll be here. Likely no more than another day or two, but as soon as I knew I was staying, I came looking for you. All day, you were all I could think about. He looked at her intently, his eyes searching for a reaction. I know what you mean, she said. I feel the same way. Drake stopped walking. Then Clara did the same. He stepped closer. Out on Sunset Street, she knew people would be watching, wondering who this stranger was and what she was doing with him. But she didn't care. Right now, nothing else mattered but what he had to say. Hey, Ricky, what's up? Blessings, my brother. Welcome into the live. Thank you so much for coming. All right, let's continue reading. Ever since you ran away, all I've wanted to do was apologize, Drake explained. I was having such a good time with you that I let myself get carried away. By being so forward, I put you in a tough spot. It was all my fault. Clara shook her head. You don't have anything to apologize for. I'm sorry all the same. They stood in silence for a while. Slowly, a smile spread across Drake's face. I have I have an idea, he said. What is it? His expression grew mischievous. Do you trust me? After everything that he had done for her, from helping her fix her truck to coming to her aid with Eddie, and even to trying to take the responsibility for what had happened the night before, she knew that she did. Clara nodded. Then let me make it up to you. Drake pointed farther down the street to a car parked against the curb. It was black, sleek, and powerful looking, even though even though it was coated with dust. Let me take you for a ride, he said. You can show me around sunset and we can talk. What do you say? She looked from him to the car and then back again. His eyes searched her face. She could see how badly he wanted her to agree. Slowly, like a door opening on rusty hinges, Clara decided to take a chance. She thought of her mother's words the night before about how she might as well reach for happiness, even when it came from somewhere completely unexpected. Are you planning on driving really fast? Clara asked. Drake grinned. Only if you want me to. And so she agreed. Drake followed Clara's directions and drove down Main Street. Businesses soon gave way to rows of houses, but within minutes, those two began to dwindle. The Plymouth bumped over railroad tracks, then sped away from Sunset and into the countryside. There, things moved at a different pace than in town, slower yet pleasant. The growl of the car's engine echoed off the thick trunks and broad boughs of the trees lining the road. A flock of birds, startled by their passing, furiously flapped their wings as they rose into the light of the setting sun. Clara had to shield her eyes to watch their flight. Drake honked at a farmer out in his field preparing that season's crops. The man waved from his tractor. That's a hard life, Drake said, nodding at the man and his farm. At least it was back when I was the one living it. Do you ever miss it? Not once since the day I left. The wind teased at Clara's hair, forcing her to keep pulling it from her face. But she had no desire to roll up her window. The air was crisp the, and full of the smells of spring, from the sweet aroma of the wildflowers that filled the ditches to the pungent stink of manure. Above the whistling wind, she could hear the radio, the faint voice of a woman singing about heartbreak. They drove over rickety bridges, around sharp corners, and up and down hills on one steep incline. Drake worked the gears so smoothly that Clara could hardly feel them shift. You do that well, she observed, nodding at his hand. Lots of practice, he replied. I've spent so much time behind the wheel of a car, I reckon I could do this in my sleep. Heck, most nights I probably do, pressing down on the clutch with my foot, one hand turning the steering wheel while the other works the shift. All of it under the covers. Under the covers. Why does that tickle me so, guys? I don't know, but I'm sure it probably tickle you too. But because you can hear me laughing and I can't hear you. But that's all right. We'll continue. His joke made them fill the car with laughter. Clara couldn't help but notice how at ease Drake made her feel. Listening to him talk, no matter whether he was making fun of himself, offering her his heartfelt apologies, or even snarling protectively the way he did at Eddie, she found herself captivated. She wanted to know everything about him. But if Clara was being honest with herself, it didn't hurt that she found him so handsome. Bouncing in the passenger's seat, she watched as sunlight streamed through the windshield and lit up his face. She noticed the small lines around his mouth and eyes, made all the more pronounced because he was squinting into the setting sun, and understood that Drake was getting older, but then again, she was too. What is it? Drake asked. He had caught her looking at him. Nothing, she answered, looking away. Clara knew she was blushing. All she could hope was that with the sun in his eyes, he didn't notice. Eventually, Clara directed him around a short bend, up a small rise, and then to stop next to the to a withered old tree, its empty branches so broad they spread out and over the road. Drake did as she asked, looked all around them, narrowed his eyes in curiosity, and then said, "So, what now?" She pointed out the window. The road stretched before them. From where they sat, with the Plymouth's engine idling rhythmically, it slowly descended, running between fields of wild grass, looking endless. Far ahead, several miles at least, it curved out of sight. "I want to know what it's like to ride in a race car," she said. Drake turned to look at her, one forearm draped over the steering wheel, the other rising to lay across the top of their seat. His fingertips brushed against Clara's shoulder. The slight touch made her skin tingle. "I thought you were joking," he said. "What you do for a living sounds exciting to me." "It's also dangerous." "Then I suppose it's a good thing for me that you'll be doing the driving," Clara responded with a sly smile. "All right," Drake said, grabbing the stick shift and putting the Plymouth into gear. "Just remember, you asked for this." From the instant Drake pressed down on the gas pedal, Clara's excitement rose as steadily as their speed. In a matter of seconds, the Plymouth was rushing down the hill, gravel crunching loudly beneath its tires. Deftly, Drake shifted from first to second gear, the engine growing louder as its pistons pounded, its belts turned, and its fuel burnt. Outside her open window, the countryside started to race by, the purples, yellows, and reds of the wildflowers spotting the ditches beginning to blur together. "You sure you want to do this?" Drake asked with a grin. Clara nodded, her heart pounding. Before she knew it, they had moved all the way to fourth gear. Clara gasped as the Plymouth began to shudder. One hand dug into the seat beside her leg, while the other gripped the door frame. She squeezed them both so hard that her knuckles turned white. By now, they had reached the bottom of the hill and were moving faster than Clara had ever gone in all her life. The wind whipped violently through their windows, causing her hair to fly in every direction. It was so strong that it even tugged at her clothing. She looked behind them and saw that they were kicking up an enormous cloud of dust. It was so exciting that she grinned from ear to ear. The Plymouth hurtled forward, its engine roaring. Drake's hands held the steering wheel tight. Thick cords of muscle stood out on his forearms. Clara was amazed at how effortless he kept the car steady, mastering the terrific speed at which they moved. She wondered what it was like for him to race other cars against other drivers willing to drive just as dangerously as he did now. As she watched him, he glanced over at her. "Are you having fun yet?" he shouted in order to be heard. She nodded, her eyes a bit wide, the sight of which made him laugh. Suddenly, Clara felt as if all her troubles had fallen away. Feeling bold, she leaned out the window. The full force of the wind struck her face and sent her hair sailing out behind her. Clara closed her eyes and felt the warmth of the setting sun on her skin. Somehow, even though the Plymouth was speeding forward, everything in motion, it felt as if this moment would forever be frozen in time, like a picture to be framed and cherished. Drake had already done so much for her, but this was yet another gift, a memory she knew she would never forget. And so, even as Drake took his foot off the gas, the car, imperceptibly beginning to slow as the sharp curb approached ahead, Clara tipped back her head and began to shout with joy as loudly as she could. "I don't know when I last saw something so beautiful." Clara nodded in agreement. Once they had finished racing down the long stretch of road, Clara's pulse still beating fast, she had directed Drake back to the way they had come. They drove down dirt roads, crossed bridges, passed through thick woods, and climbed up into the hills southeast of Sunset. Finally, with the sun still a good hour from the horizon, they entered a clearing that looked over the town, the river, the miles of countryside. They got out of the car, climbed the front bumper, and sat on the Plymouth's warm hood. For 10 minutes, neither of them had said a word. Instead, they watched as the gentle breeze stirred the tall grass all around them. Brilliant sunset Brilliant sunlight reflected off the slowly moving river. A boat chugged against the current, dark smoke puffing from its stack. A flock of geese winged their way north, passing close enough for their honking to reach Clara and Drake. It was as if they were looking at a work of art, priceless because it was so very real. I don't know what could be better than this, Drake said. You should see it You should see it in the fall when the leaves change color and the sun is on the water. Everything, as far as you can see, is bright orange and gold. Is this how the town got its name? Clara shook her head. I'm not sure. My husband used to say that. She started, but then stopped. That was the second time she had mentioned Joe to Drake, and it felt uncomfortable, even a little unfair. After everything he had done for her, that she was certain that the last thing Drake wanted was to hear about a man who had been dead for more than 9 years. But then Drake surprised her. What was his name? He asked. Clara's heart again started to pound, although this time it wasn't because of excitement. Joe, she answered softly. What was he like? She turned to face him, just like before in the Plymouth, and the bright sun illuminated his face, which did nothing to slow her pulse. She offered him a faint smile. You don't want to know any of that. Sure I do, Drake answered. He stared back at her. Welcome, guys. Wow, people came up in here before I could see. Hey, Shadeen, my love. How are you doing, darling? Good to see you. She stole my thunder, my love. How are you doing? Sujini. Good morning, my dear. How are you doing? And there is my wonderful yard food. Don't forget to hit the like button and share out the stream, my friends. Invite your friends and friends and friends to come on over to the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. I hope you all are enjoying the reading so far as much as I'm enjoying bringing it to you for you and for us. Okay? Thank you all so much. We will continue. Clara's heart again started to pound, although this time it wasn't because of excitement. Joe, she answered softly. What was he like? She turned to face him, just like before in the Plymouth. The bright sun illuminated his face, which did nothing to slow her pulse. She offered him a faint smile. You don't want to know any of that. Sure I do, Drake answered. He stared back at her, his dark eyes unwavering, his expression compassionate yet strong. It's clear that he meant a lot to you, that he still does. If I'm going to get to know you better, then I want to hear all about him. He paused. Please, please tell me. And so, a bit reluctantly, Clara took a deep breath and began to speak of her life with Joe Sinclair. She told him how they had met, how their first date had been at the movies to see a comedy whose name she could never remember, and about how she had known even then that he was special. Soon she had warmed up, and the memories came quickly. Their wedding, building their home, Tommy's birth, and even the day just after the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor when Joe had enlisted in the army. She found herself talking about things she hadn't for a very long time, not even to her mother. When she told him a funny story, Drake laughed right along with her. Sounds like your husband was a great guy, Drake said, his words completely genuine. It's easy to see why you miss him. Clara felt tears well up in her eyes, but she didn't want to cry. Not here, not now. How about you? She asked. Has there ever been someone special in your life? Drake chuckled, but it sounded forced. Not anyone that mattered, and certainly not like what you had with Joe. Surely there was somebody. When I was younger, sure, there was a few women who were with me for a while, but the life of a race car driver, going from town to town, never really knowing where you'll be from one day to the next, it's not a life worth sharing. Traveling with Amos is one thing, he explained with a smile, but there aren't many ladies who are keen on bouncing around in the back seat while speeding down roads you can't find on any map. Drake paused, his eyes staring far away. Can I confess something to you? He asked. A thought that's been on my mind lately. You can tell me anything, Clara replied. He smiled, clearly pleased by her answer. I don't know how much longer I want to do this, he explained. Nowadays, it seems like whenever I run a race, I look over and the other driver is some pimply faced kid who was probably in diapers the first time I got behind the wheel. Hell, it happened just this morning. Clara's eyes widened. You had a race today? He nodded. Did you win? Drake chuckled loudly. Nope, he said. Amos thought it'd be easy, but it sure didn't work out that way. Not by a mile. Why not? Your car seems awfully fast to me. Speed is a part of racing, but a car is only as good as the man driving it. And today, I wasn't worth squat. I reckon I had too much on my mind. He means me. And what happened between us last night? Clara's mind raced to grasp all the implications of what Drake had just said. Her heart pounded and her skin flushed, making her somehow feel both flattered and embarrassed at the same time. There was a small part of her that wanted to press him about it, to know that she wasn't mistaken, that he had been so lost in thoughts about her that he had lost his race, but she just couldn't. Not yet. If you didn't race anymore, what would you do? She asked instead. Hey guys, how are you all doing? You are welcome, my darling Shadeen. You are welcome, my love. Oh, Sister Winsome, how are you doing? How are you doing, Sister Winsome? Good to see you. As always, my love. Work smarter, not harder, Sister Winsome. I always figured I'd open a garage. I might not be as good at fixing engines and the like as Amos, but I can more than hold my own. What with all the new models coming out, Fords, DeSotas, Studebacks, and folks buying them like they're going out of style, I figure there will always be a demand for a guy who doesn't mind getting his hands dirty. Drake paused. Actually, that reminds me, I have a favor to ask. What is it? I wanted to know if I could use your garage to work on the Plymouth, he explained. After every race, it pays to make sure that everything's running properly. I do it out in the front of the hotel, but I don't think it will go over well. Clara nodded. After everything you have done for me, how could I say no? Though I should warn you, the garage door is broken. I've asked Tommy to fix it, but well, he has other things on his mind these days. I'll take care of it, Drake said. I won't need it for long, a couple of hours or maybe less. You don't have to hurry, she told him. She paused, then added, you can stay as long as you'd like. Hmm, hmm, hmm. She already inviting him to stay as long as you like. Oh, guys, I'm so I'm so anxious about this. I want to know what's going to happen. And I don't want to read ahead of y'all because I want to be just as excited as you are when we get to it. So I'm not cheating. I am not reading ahead of y'all, my friends. We are going at the same pace. Let us continue. Where were we? All right. You don't have to worry, she told him. She paused, then added, "You can stay as long as you'd like." Silence stretched between them. Clara went back and forth between being angry at herself for being so forward and the next second wanting to say more. Unable to choose, she did neither. It was uncomfortable, this dance between them. She was woefully out of practice. Down on the river, where the sun was starting to melt into the trees on the far bank, the boat blew its horn. The sound rolled across the water and up the hill. It was then that Drake unexpectedly slid off the Plymouth's hood to stand right in front of her. He placed a hand beside her and leaned forward slightly, staring into her eyes as she unflinchingly looked back. "Last night," he began, "I moved too fast. I assumed things that I shouldn't have and ended up putting you in an uncomfortable spot." "Drake, I told you that," Clara began, but he cut her off. "Listen to me," he said. "The reason I'm telling you this is so that before I come closer, before I kiss you, there won't be any surprises." "All right," she murmured, suddenly breathless. "This way, if you didn't want me to do it, you could stop me before I make a fool out of myself." Clara's heart raced. She wondered if even the Plymouth's engine worked as hard. Drake's boldness was shocking, yet refreshing. She was amazed at how easily he could tell her what he wanted without seeming embarrassed. She wondered how she should reply. And then, like a bolt of lightning, she knew that the answer was as brazen as the man standing before her. So Clara didn't move, didn't say a word, and she most definitely didn't try to dissuade Drake from what he was intended to do. In the end, she knew without a shadow of a doubt that she wanted the exact same thing, wanted it so badly that it surprised her. A thin smile spread across Drake's face. His hand found hers as he leaned closer, pausing for only a moment, surely wondering if she was going to once again change her mind. But when she didn't, he committed to kissing her. He tenderly placed his lips against hers. At first, their touch was tentative, and their eyes remained open, watching each other as if neither of them could believe what was happening. But it didn't take long for Clara to give in to her feelings. It had been almost 10 years since she had last kissed a man, since well before Joe's death. She closed her eyes, wondering how she had found herself here with this man, but she was happy about it all the same. She didn't think about his she didn't think about her mother's memory loss, her son's problems, their financial difficulties, or Eddie's unwanted advances. She didn't even think about her deceased husband. Up till then, the last man she had touched. All she could think about was Drake McCoy, the way he kissed her, and all the wonderful ways he made her feel. Oh, that is so delightful and delicious to read. Oh, she has found someone who has brought her out of her little closet to make her feel in love again. Overton! Overton! Oh my God, Overton, how you doing? Jeez, good to see you, my brother. Overton, you come just in time for the kiss. Mwah! You come just in time for the kiss, Overton. From me to you, my brother. Mwah, mwah. All right, now we are on to chapter 13. I can't believe the nerve of that old goat. All right, there, guys. Let us do this. I can't believe the nerve of that old goat. Why it took all the restraint I had to keep from knocking that grin off his damn face. Drake fought back a grin of his own. Amos paced quickly across their small hotel room, his eyes narrow and angry as his hands waved wildly, punctuating the air about every word he spat. Just minutes earlier, he had whipped open the door and begun ranting, complaining that his efforts to convince the old man and his son to give them a rematch had met with unexpected resistance. So there I go, walking into that dump of a diner, swallowed my pride, and headed over to where he'd sitting. For I knew it. He's offering to buy me breakfast, Amos said with a sneer. Like I'm some charity case. Like he took the, like he took the last dime I owned when that hillbilly son of his crossed the finishing line. But he pretty much did, didn't he? Drake asked, unable to resist the urge to give his friend a little ribbing. He don't know that, Amos barked, so I waved him off. Take a seat, order a cup of coffee, and start laying it all out. I done just like we agreed. I complimented his boy's driving, the car, everything I could think of. He's just soaking it all in, nodding like a sunflower in a stiff breeze. But then, when I suggest we do it again, that we raise the stakes a bit, suddenly he ain't so sure. He's hemming and hawing, making one excuse after another. I walked out of there madder than a hornet. Dumb, stubborn bastard. There was a part of Drake that understood the mechanic's frustration. Deep down, he was angry that he had allowed himself to be distracted enough to lose the race. He wanted another chance to win, but there was also a part of him that was thrilled by the other man's reluctance to give him an opportunity to win back their money. If he was dragging things out, it meant more time that he could spend with Clara. You are welcome, Overton. You are welcome every time and anytime, my love. Every time and anytime. We should just give we should just give up and hit the road, Amos argued. Drake shook his head. Not yet. Be patient. He's just making you sweat it a little bit. He'll eventually come around. Tempt him with a high enough wager. He won't be able to turn it down forever. The mechanic frowned. You got the money to stake on it? I told you not to worry. I'll be taken care of. Drake grabbed the Plymouth's keys and headed for the door. You sure you don't want to come along? He asked. Last night he had told Amos about Clara's agreeing to let them use the garage. Nah, he answered. As riled up as I am, I'm likely to do more harm than good. I'm just going to stay here and wear a hole in the floor. Who knows? Maybe I'll calm down enough to have another go at that old fart. Don't get too worked up. Your ticker might not be able to take it. When Drake shut the door behind him, Amos was already back to complaining. Drake drove towards Clara's house. He had hitched up the small trailer that held his tools. It bounced along behind. Above, clouds blotted out the sun, growing darker to the north, threatening rain. But even with a gloomier day, he found himself smiling at familiar sights, as if the small town was growing on him. His only regret was that he wouldn't see Clara. Last night, when he dropped her off, he had explained that she would have to return to the bank in the morning. Drake had frowned. He remembered the strange scene he had stumbled across, the pudgy man in his poorly fitting suit, how relieved Clara had been to see him, the fact that the banker had continued to protest about her leaving all the way up until Drake had snarled threateningly, and the way Clara avoided his questions about what had happened after they left. Last night, he had pressed her for more details, but she insisted that nothing was wrong and he had let the matter drop. Instead, he dwelled on their kiss. From the moment he had watched Clara stick her head out of the Plymouth's window as they sped along and shout with joy, Drake had known that he would again try to hold her in his arms, to place his lips against hers. Still, he wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. Asking for her permission had been necessary. Fortunately, Clara hadn't objected, and so they had kissed. And what a kiss it had been! Even if he had been dreaming about it ever since he had met her, their kiss had still been greater than his wildest expectations. The warmth of her skin, the smell of her hair, the taste of her lips, the way her hand squeezed his arm, how he had held her in his arms as they watched the sun disappear out of sight. All of it had left Drake lying awake in his bed far into the night, wondering if he had ever truly known happiness before meeting Clara. Drake turned down Clara's street and pulled into her driveway. No sooner had he shut off the Plymouth engine and gotten out than the side door of the house opened and a woman came outside. She was older, her hair a silvery white with only a few darker streaks. But there was something about her that was immediately familiar to him, the soft curve of her mouth and the shape of her eyes. A damp apron was tied around her waist, and she held a knife in one hand. Who are you? She asked, her expression a potent mix of confusion and anger. What do you think you are doing parking here? Clara had warned him about the sort of reception he might receive from her mother. Delicately and without much detail, she had told him that Christine's memory wasn't what it used to be, and that even if she explained that she would be coming over, that he would be coming over, her mother might not remember it by the time he arrived. Clearly, her worries had been well founded. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said, putting on his friendliest smile, glancing at the knife. My name is Drake McCoy. I'm an acquaintance of Clara, your daughter. She might have mentioned me. Faster than he could have snapped his fingers, Christine's expression changed. Oh, that's right, she exclaimed, a hand rising to her cheek. Drake was relieved that it wasn't the one holding the knife. Clara told me all about it, but I plumb forgot. I'm terribly sorry. There's no need to be. I'm the one intruding. He motioned towards the Plymouth. I hope I won't be putting you out any. Not at all, not at all. Quite frankly, it will be nice to have someone else around. Most days, I'm the only one here. I shouldn't be long, a couple of hours at the most. Take your time. Take your time, son. Suddenly, Christine frowned. I suppose you'd like to use the garage. I would, Drake replied. Christine pointed towards the rear of the drive. Drake's gaze followed, and he saw a building in dire need of repair. Its white paint was chipped and weathered, and there was a broken pane of glass in the side door. Worst of all, the two swinging doors of the main entrance had come loose from their hinges, awkwardly tipping inward like a pair of warped teeth. I'm afraid it isn't in the best of shape, Clara's mother commented. Tommy's tried to put the doors back up, but he has never managed. I'll see what I can do. All right then. I suppose I'll go finish my dishes and let you go to work. It was nice to meet you, he offered. Likewise. But then, just as Christine reached the house, her hand on the door, she stopped, turned, and walked back to where Drake stood. He had been lost in thought, staring at the garage, wondering where to start. For a moment, there was an awkward silence between them. Drake began to question whether the older woman had had an episode, if she wasn't sure who he was or what they had just talked about. There was a sudden break in the clouds, and sunlight streamed down, glinting brightly off the knife's blade. I have a question for you, she finally said. Maybe it isn't my place to ask, but I'm having a hard time holding my tongue. Go ahead, ma'am, he told her. What are your intentions towards my daughter? Somewhere down in Drake's gut, he had had a suspicion that this was what Clara's mother would ask, though answering wasn't going to be easy. I've enjoyed getting to know her, he began. I can honestly tell you that I've never met a woman quite like Clara. Christine took a small step closer. The reason I'm asking is because she's been through an awful lot, she explained. Her husband died in the war. Tommy, though I love him dearly, is going over Fool's Hill. Now, on top of everything else, she's saddled with a mother who struggles to remember what day it is. She added with a short, sad laugh. When someone's got so many things working against them, the slightest glimmer of hope becomes a precious jewel, something to hold on to tightly, like a life preserver in a raging sea. With the way Clara's been acting these last couple of days, I can't help but think that she sees you as her knight in shining armor come come along to rescue her. The last thing I'd want would be for her to end up disappointed. Christine paused. Or hurt, intentionally or otherwise. Drake could see how much Christine loved her daughter. She was doing what any good parent would. She was protecting her child. In many ways, he wanted the same thing for Clara, to see her smile and be happy. But he also didn't want to make any promises he couldn't keep, to lead her on in any way. Welcome to the live, guys. Thank you all so much for coming. Oh, wow. So here is Clara trying to protect Tommy from that girl. And here is her mother trying to protect her from Drake. Ain't that something? A mother will always be a mother. No matter how old you are, your mother will always be the one expressing concern, especially with your love life. And with Clara having so much going on for her, I am not surprised that her mother is concerned. And I'm surprised that Christine's mental clarity has come forth at this time. It has come forth so clearly at this time as opposed to other times. I tell you, it is some things that even the most demented patients, there are some things that make them think clearly and other things that just throw them whacked. So let us continue. Oh, Rambo, what's up? What's up, family? How you doing? Good to see you. I mean, still lecture me. I listen. Yeah, no problem. I sincerely appreciate you, my love. I appreciate you. We are here reading this book here. We are going to continue. I appreciate you, my love. Let us continue. Drake could see how much Christine loved her daughter. She was doing what any good parent would. She was protecting her child. In many ways, he wanted the same thing for Clara, to see her smile and be happy. But he also didn't want to make any promises he couldn't keep, to lead her on in any way. When he had met Clara, Drake had felt something between them, other than that first night when she had run from him. Those sparks had grown, bursting into flames when they had kissed. Drake couldn't have said how certain for certain how high their passion might go, where it might take them, but he wanted to find out. Wonderful. I see you're a great listener, Rambo. I give you my word, he finally said. I won't do her wrong. A smile brightened Christine's face. See that you don't, she answered, giving the knife one last shake for good measure. Drake watched as Clara's mother walked back to the house. This time she entered, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He couldn't help but wonder if, given Christine's troubles, she might soon forget what they had talked about. He knew that he wouldn't. Once Drake had pulled the Plymouth closer to the garage, he decided to do something about the broken doors. Examining them closer, he saw that some screws had come free from the framing, many of which were missing altogether. He grabbed some replacements and tools and set about trying to drive them back into place, but soon found that the doors were too heavy to hold while he worked. Instead, he popped the Plymouth's hood, occasionally glancing up at the darkening sky, wondering just how long it would be before the rain began to fall. He began by checking the fluid levels. Satisfied, he moved on to the engine's belts, looking for any signs of wear. He whistled while he worked. Drake had always found comfort working with machines, especially engines. Under a car's hood, under a car's hood, everything had a purpose. Somewhere it was supposed to be, and something it was supposed to do. It even if even one bolt or lug nut was out of place, broken, or unable to do its intended job, then the whole car suffered. Any good mechanic knew that he had to take good care of his vehicle and do whatever work he needed to keep it running smoothly and strong. Work like this had other benefits too, such as letting him forget about all the things on his mind, allowing his hands to make the hard choices instead of his head. He was just about to inspect the Plymouth hoses when he heard footsteps behind him. He figured it was Christine, but when he ducked out from under the hood, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag, he found that he was wrong. A teenage boy watched him warily. His hair was dark and worn longer than Drake's had been at the same age, which he guessed to be somewhere around 16. He was tall and a little thin, which made his clothes hang a bit loosely on his frame. Drake might have wondered who his visitor was if it hadn't been for the boy's eyes, green with flecks of gold, the spitting image of his mother's. Howdy, Jake said with a nod. The boy didn't answer. He just kept staring, his arms folded defiantly across his chest. You must be Tommy, Drake continued, stuffing the dirty rag into his back pocket and sticking out his hand. Have heard a lot about you. Clara's son's stubbornness showed no signs of letting up. Drake let his extended hand linger in the air for a few seconds before dropping it. I'm Drake, he said, straining to tamp down his growing irritation, reminding himself that he wanted to make a good impression. I know, the boy said petulantly. My grandmother told me. Tommy's words removed Drake's concern that Christine wouldn't remember who he was or why he was there. How do you know my mother? Tommy blurted. I helped her out with her truck, Drake explained. That thing's a hunk of a junk. Drake chuckled. It's seen better days, he agreed. In return, your mother was kind enough to let me come over so I could work on my car. I'd planned on driving it into the garage, but the doors are broken. Tommy finished. Drake had an idea. They don't have to be, he said. Not if you help me. The boy kept on frowning. Drake wondered if he wasn't about to make up an excuse to walk away. But Tommy surprised him by shrugging his shoulders and asking, what do you need me to do? Once he had gathered his tools, Drake showed Tommy where to stand and had him lift up one of the garage doors by its bottom edge. The boy's knees wavered, but to protect Tommy's pride, Drake decided not to ask if he needed any help. Instead, he aligned the holes at the hinge and began to drive the metal back into the wooden frame, one twist of the screwdriver at a time. So this is your car? Tommy asked, looking at the Plymouth. The Plymouth. It is, Drake answered. Is it fast? It better be, or I won't make any money. Noticing the boy's confusion, Drake explained. I race it for a living. Tommy's eyes widened a bit. Around a track? There or down a long stretch of road? The straighter, the better. Anywhere anyone, anywhere anyone else wants to challenge me. And you win? Most of the time, he answered, still feeling the sting of his loss the day before. It wouldn't be worth it if I didn't. Noticing the way Clara's son was still staring at the car, he added, do you like to drive? Sure, although my mom's truck is usually more work than fun. Drake noticed that Tommy's arms shook slightly from the strain of holding the door steady, and that he was starting to sweat. Naomi's dad just bought a brand new Studebaker, and she's gonna try to talk him into letting us take it for a spin. Is Naomi your gal? To Drake, the question was as innocent as a newborn babe. He vaguely remembered Clara mentioning the name and figured that asking about her might be a way to extend their conversation, for them to bond a bit. Tommy's reaction said otherwise. It was as harsh as it was swift. Like you don't know, the boy snapped, his voice trembling more than his arms. I can only imagine what my mother has told you about her. Tommy, listen, I don't. She's just jealous. She doesn't care if I'm happy. I don't want to hear it from her, and I sure as hell am not going to be hearing it from you. Without warning, Tommy let go of the garage door. Unfortunately for Drake, he hadn't yet replaced enough of the screws, and the weight of the door yanked them all out again. Everything crashed to the ground with a jarring bang. Before Drake could say anything, Tommy was already stalking off. When he reached the house, he slammed the door shut behind him. Drake was still watching, feeling a little stunned, when the first drops of rain began to fall. Stupid, he muttered to himself. Unknowingly, he had lit the boy's fuse, and like a firecracker, Tommy had exploded. Hmm, nice first impression. And guys, and guys, wait. I really am anxious to see to read what happened next. If you all want to hear the next chapter, tell me in the chat. If you all want to move on to chapter 14, tell me in the chat. I'll move right on to chapter 14 and let that be the last chapter for the day. If not, we will end it right here. So if one person of the few million people here right now say move on to chapter 14, I will. If not, we will call it a day. Going once, going twice, going three times. Go. I knew you would say that. Yes, Tommy need ice. Tommy is kind of hot head. Tommy is a little too hot for himself, believe me. But you know that's how teenagers are. Teenagers sometimes you can find some nice calm ones, but on the other hand, you find some of them are just raggedy and wretched, I tell you. But let's continue with chapter 14. Amos Barstow was conflicted. Hold on, guys. I need a little bit of light here. All right. Amos Barstow was conflicted. He paced. He mumbled angrily. He sat down on the edge of his bed and ran a hand through his thinning hair. He went to stand at the window, nervously looking up and down the street, wondering when he would see Drake returning, worrying that he might find Sweet and his boys, frightened that the drug dealer had finally tracked him down. He paced more and more. How in the hell did I end up in this mess? He asked himself. But Amos already knew the answer. He was an addict, and he was a thief. And now, as he stared longingly at Drake's duffel bag, leaned in the corner, he wondered how much longer he could call himself a friend. Oh, Lord Jesus. Amos is now planning to go in Drake's duffel bag, and there's going to be hell to pay because in that duffel bag, Drake has his whole life savings. Oh, Lord Jesus. Yesterday, after Drake's unexpected defeat, Amos had tried to lose his mounting worries in what remained of his morphine. No sooner had Drake left, no doubt no doubt to visit that widow who had caught his eye. Then Amos had escaped to a better place. For hours he had rested peacefully, turning events over and over again in his head. But in the end, he hadn't been able to stop thinking about one thing in particular. Lord Jesus, he's thinking about Drake's money. Let us continue. Oh my God. OMG. Hmm. The money for the bet Drake was proposing. Amos was broke. All his cash, what was left of his winnings, along with what he had stolen from Sweet, had been lost in Drake's disastrous defeat. Amos had considered it a safe wager. Unfortunately, it had been anything but. Still, the solution Drake had offered to their troubles sounded good, but only if they actually had the money to throw into the pot. Drake claimed to have it, which left Amos with one more important question in need of an answer. Where is he hiding it? Hmm. Rising groggily, trying to shake off the effects of the morphine, Amos had searched the hotel room. He pulled open drawers, pawed through the closet, dropped to the floor to peer under each bed, and had even lifted the mattresses, desperate to find Drake's hidden money. Once he was certain it wasn't to be found inside, he had gone out to rummage inside the Plymouth trailer. But still, he had found nothing. Back in the room, sweaty and growing frustrated, the answer had suddenly struck Amos like a ton of bricks. It was in Drake's duffel bag. Unfortunately, the bag was nowhere to be seen. It must still be in the Plymouth. He had waited and waited until finally, later that night, Drake returned with it slung over his shoulder. Every moment since, Amos had struggled not to stare at it. Now Drake was gone, and the bag was right there. Still, Amos hesitated. Even though he had done his share of despicable things lately, he knew that rooting around in Drake's belongings would be crossing a line. Drake was like family. They had been through thick and thin, racing together more times than Amos could count. Drake trusted him. Amos knew that the racer would give him the shirt off his back if asked. But the longer the mechanic stared at the bag, the more he tried to justify taking a look. You aren't going to take the money. All you are going to do is see if it's there. Nothing more. That way, you'll know for certain. He locked the door and closed the curtains. The idea of someone witnessing his betrayal made him nauseous. Grabbing the duffel bag, he pulled it on his bed. Seconds later, he dug in, working his way down past Drake's clothes and the paperback books he was always reading until he was nearly at the bottom. And then, just like that, there it was. Money, lots of it, wads of cash, rubber banded together. Amos didn't remove any of the bills. He wondered if it was because he didn't want to disturb them too much and make Drake suspect his things had been ransacked, or because he feared he would take off with it right then and there. Instead, he rubbed the bills between his thumb and forefinger, counting them. He soon he soon arrived at a number that sent chills racing down his spine. He couldn't believe Drake had so much. Amos knew that if he took it, he could run for months, go somewhere far to the west, escape his pursuers, and buy whatever drugs he wanted. Most, if not all, of his worries would be gone. Slowly, Amos put back the money, straightened Drake's things, and then placed the duffel bag back in the corner. No matter how badly he needed the money, regardless of how frightened he was that Sweet Woods would catch up to him, and ignoring the fact that he was running low on morphine, he just couldn't do it to Drake. He wouldn't steal from his friend, at least not yet. Eddie Fuller was drunk. He swirled the scotch in his glass, spinning it faster and faster. until a tiny wave slushed over the lip, wet his thumb, and then fell onto the floor, where it stained an antique rug his father had imported from Egypt. What a waste, he muttered. The grandfather clock in his study chimed 3 times. Outside, the afternoon was overcast, with occasional fits of rain. Most days, at that hour, he wouldn't have he would have been sitting behind his desk at the bank, going over reports, making telephone calls, doing all the things that were his responsibility as the man in charge. But not today, not after what had happened. Frustration, anger, and even if he was being completely honest with himself, a little fear coursed through him. It wasn't supposed to be this way. How had everything gone so wrong? He had given Clara some time to think about the pampered future he was proposing to her. While he was disappointed she hadn't immediately accepted, later he understood that she had others to think about besides herself. Still, he had felt certain that with some space and a few days to work it out, she'd see that becoming Mrs. Edward Fuller was the only logical choice she could make. Besides, she knew what would happen if she decided otherwise. With that in mind, Eddie had begun making plans for his courtship. Eddie's Eddie is something else. I never hear a man making plans for a woman, the woman have no clue about it. What in the world? Besides, she knew what would happen if she decided otherwise. With that in mind, Eddie had begun making plans for their courtship. They were every bit as romantic as they were meticulous. When it came time to close the bank for the day, he would send the other employees home, ensuring that he and Clara could be alone. Stashed in his office were candles, a bouquet of red roses, an extremely expensive bottle of wine, and even a radio to provide just the right ambience. Everything had been in place. It was perfect. Me said Drake I go beat him to a pulp if him ever touch Drake money. But then, unexpectedly, it had all gone terribly wrong. Eddie drained the last inch of alcohol, barely noticing it burn its way down his throat. Before the booze had time to settle in his stomach, he was already pouring himself some more. He was growing pleasantly used to the way alcohol clouded his thoughts. Now he understood why his father had kept so much of it around. But on this night, no matter how hard he tried to drown his troubles, they kept bubbling back to the surface. Over and over, the same question rose in Eddie's mind, teasing him, tormenting him. Who was that man? At first, he had assumed that the stranger's interruption was an accident, that he had wanted to use the bank but had shown up too late. But as the man continued to pound on the door, ignoring Eddie's shouts that they were closed, his eyes never left Clara. It soon seemed obvious that his arrival weren't mere happenstance. The stranger's growing insistence to get inside was because of her. Clara had been relieved to see him. The most thing was that Eddie had been frightened when the stranger barged inside the bank. Eddie had wanted to stop them from leaving, but when the man spoke, his voice a threatening growl, Eddie had backed down. Even though he was rich, one of the most important and powerful men in Sunset, at that moment he had been a coward. A mixture of shame and fear had kept him holed up in his house ever since, alone, drinking the hours away, far from Clara Sinclair. But he couldn't stay hidden forever. No matter what it took, he would learn he would learn the identity of the stranger, where he came from, and how he and Clara knew each other. Yesterday, Eddie had assumed that it would only be a matter of time before he and Clara were happily married. But now things had changed. Oh Lord, poor Eddie. Doubt had crept into his thoughts. His heart overflowed with love for her, but now he wondered if she would ever give him the chance to show it to her, at least voluntarily. Something had to be done. He had to make the stranger go away, and soon. Eddie tossed back his drink, winced as he swallowed hard, and banged the empty glass down on his desk. He took a deep breath. It was time to get to work. Naomi Marsh was bored. All afternoon, she had sat at the window of her father's bar, absently watching the sky turn gray and then finally let loose, rain drumming across the glass. The marshland was almost empty, other than Wilbur, drying glasses with a dirty rag while taking nips from a bottle of whiskey. There was only a handful of sunsets, most depressing and, and desperate, the sort of drunks who had nowhere else to be on a weekend afternoon. The sky of the kind of people on the road to ruin. Those were all drunks. So what does that say about me? If I'm sitting here with them, doesn't that make me every bit as pathetic? Naomi shook her head. She was nothing. She was nothing like those people. She had prospects, a future far away from this place. Someday soon she would leave and never return. To further distract herself, Naomi thought of Tommy. She had even begun to entertain the thought that she was being too harsh with the boy, that instead of teasing him, making promises of her flesh that never seemed to come true, she should just give him a taste. After all, the only reason she hadn't slept with him yet was because of the thrill of power it gave her, like having a dog on a leash. But sex could be plenty of thrilling too. If she gave in, they could both have a little fun. But then Tommy had shown up madder than a hornet. Oh, Jesus, help my soul, me on this book. All right, hold on, there, guys, hold on there. Let me fix myself properly here. Hold on, hold on. My phone is losing charge. Let me plug it in here so that we can, so that we don't lose it. So that we don't lose it. All right, let's go. Who the hell does he think he is anyway? He paced back and forth, frowning as the floorboards creaked loudly beneath his feet. They had left the bar in favor of the apartment Naomi shared with her father, directly across the street from the bar. With her old man tending to his customers, they wouldn't be bothered for hours. Naomi had brought Tommy Naomi had brought Tommy there before, but had never let him into her room, and had certainly never let him see her sprawled out on her bed, inviting, willing. Not that he seemed to care. What are you talking about? She asked, growing annoyed. The guy who knows my mom. The one with the car, he snapped, showing some annoyance of his own, angry that she hadn't been listening. Which car? Faintly, Naomi remembered Tommy mentioning this already, but she couldn't recall any of the details. While he rambled on, she had been busy running her fingers along the side of his leg, tracing the seam of his jeans. She had been stunned when he took her hand away so he could get up and pace. I don't know what make it his, he answered. An Oldsmobile, maybe. He races it for a living, goes around making bets. Naomi sat up on the edge of the bed and made a show of slowly unbuttoning the front of her shirt, which she had which she had buttoned soon after they arrived. Why was he at your house? She asked. That girl is a teaser. She's something else. Because my mother told him that he could use our garage. But your garage is broken. He wanted me to help him fix it, Tommy said. So did you? He nodded. He was fine for a while. He talked about his car, how fast it went. But then he started in about you. Naomi stopped what she was doing. What he had said, what did he say? don't remember. Not exactly, Tommy answered, pa- pacing faster, growing more worked up by the second. I'm trying to skip over some words, guy. I got company. Oh, that's it for the pausing. I'm sort of skipping over some words there, some special words right there. Okay. How would he know anything about me? From my mom, no doubt. So you know that what he heard about wasn't good. So then what did you do? I took off, Tommy told her. I've been holding the garage door, so I let it go. Probably broke it worse than it was already broken. But I couldn't care less. But once again, Naomi wasn't paying attention. Her mind churned as she considered the opportunity that had unexpectedly presented itself. This was a chance to have some real fun, one that might prove more entertaining than messing around with a boy pretending to be a man. What did you say this guy's name was? She asked. Drake McCoy, he answered. As Tommy went back to ranting, Naomi couldn't help but smile. In a small town, as small as Sunset, it wouldn't be hard for her to learn more about the driver, particularly where he was staying. All she needed was for them to have an accidental meeting, for him to get a good look at a young, beautiful woman like her, and then Drake McCoy would be hers. Jesus, what a woman! What a young woman! The thought of sticking it to Clara Sinclair and even to her son, just because she could, was too enticing to ignore. Maybe she would have some fun after all. OMG. OMG. What's up with Naomi? Naomi's out of control. Ronald Sweetwoods was tired. For days they had driven up and down dirt roads, passed through sleepy towns, pushed open the doors of roadside markets and seedy taverns, roused drunks and regular folks who weren't looking for any trouble, all in the increasingly futile hope of finding some sign of Amos Barstow or the money and drugs he had stolen. So far, they had come up empty handed. How much further do you intend to take this? Sweet glanced up. Jesse Church yawned into the back of his hand. Malcolm Child stood a ways off, lighting a cigarette. The match illuminated the night for a second before he shook it out. High above, a thin moon shone dully. As long as it takes, Sweet answered. This keeps up, we might still be looking come Christmas. So for those of you who are just coming, you may not know who these people are. So there is one of Sweet, the drug dealer, from whom Amos stole the morphine and the money. And he and Jesse Church and Malcolm Child are on their way to finding Amos because they want their money and their morphine back. And Amos is now in the hotel room planning on stealing Drake's little savings. And there is going to be hell to pay. Happy Sunday, Jojo. How are you doing, my love? So good to see you, my darling. So good to see you. Happy Sunday to you. Oh, you're in the kitchen cooking Sunday dinner. Oh, I'm going to go down and cook mine in a little bit. I don't know if I'm going to be on live while I do it, but I might be. I'm not sure. But I'm just doing the reading. Because, we all expect to read a day. It's healthy to read a day. A chapter a day, keep the mind from blowing away. I don't know, something like that. Let's continue. How much further do you intend to take this? Sweet glanced up. Jesse Church yawned into the back of his hand. Malcolm Child stood a ways off, lighting a cigarette. The match illuminated the night for a second before he shook it out. High above, a thin moon shone dully. As long as it takes, Sweet answered. This keeps up, we might still be looking come Christmas. Sweet unwrapped a candy and popped it into his mouth, as much to him as much to keep himself from losing his temper as to satisfy a desire for sugar. The Cadillac was parked at a crossroads smack dab in the middle of nowhere. Many long miles had passed since they had last seen a house. Crickets sang their unending melody in the tall grass. Sweet had spread their well worn map across the car's hood as he tried to figure out where they went, as well as where they might go next. After that first successful sighting, they had branched out in different directions, like the spokes of a bicycle wheel, looking to stay on Barstow's trail. Unfortunately, every path had so far ended in failure. Now only a couple of options remained. They were close. Sweet was sure of it. It was no time to quit. You want him to pack it in? He asked, rolling the hard candy around in his mouth, knocking it against his teeth. I'm not saying that, boss, Jessie replied, aware that he was treading on dangerous ground. Go on then. Explain it to me so I understand. It's just that we have been on this for more than a week now, the thug explained. We are tired. None of us has gotten more than a couple of hours of sleep at a time. Usually, when we are parked on the side of the road, it's been so long since I slept in a bed that I've darn near forgotten what it feels like. Jessie laughed nervously. Hell, I wish I had. That way, I wouldn't miss it so much. Sweet didn't disagree. All of them looked like hell. Their clothes rumpled and stained from their time on the road, their eyes bloodshot from another night of fitful sleep. He missed St. Louis and its never ending hustle, so completely different from the slow boredom of the country. He wanted nothing more than to sit down for a nice meal, soak in a hot tub of water, sleep with one of his favorite whores, and then doze for days. But that wasn't in the cards, not until that bastard Barstow was dead and Sweet's wounded pride restored. So, in answer to Jesse's complaints, he drew his gun. You want to rest so bad? Sweet said, cocking the pistol's hammer and leveling the barrel at the middle of Jesse's chest. I might be able to help. Oh my God. No, 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 no. Wait a second, boss. Wait a second. The henchman stammered, all the bravado falling from his face, his hands raised in submission. Without hesitation, Sweet tugged on the trigger and fired a bullet into the ground just to the side of where Jessie stood, kicking up a cloud of dirt. In the otherwise quiet night, the gunshot was deafeningly loud. Jessie had been too frightened to make a sound. You still want to quit looking? Sweet asked. Jessie panted, his eyes wider than the moon. No, 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 let's go. Let's go. For a few seconds longer, Sweet kept the gun right where it was, as if he was still weighing whether or not to kill Jessie where he stood. It was more than just a desire, not to show weakness to someone beneath him. He needed to catch Amos Barstow to make him pay for what he had done. Finally, he uncocked the gun and put it back in his waistband. Jesse's chest continued to heave. His heart struggled to slow. Sweet noticed that through it all, Malcolm had never moved or said a word, but only watched as he smoked his cigarette. We'll go towards Clarion and then on to Sunset. O-M-G. O-M-G. They are going on to Sunset, and that's where Barstow is. Jesus, my Lord. Let us continue. Let us continue. We'll go towards Clarion and then on to Sunset, Sweet explained. From either one of those places, they might have crossed over the river, so we'll have to expand our search if we don't find their trail. Malcolm got behind the wheel, flicking his cigarette butt into the dark. Though he had yet to get his legs underneath him, Jesse managed to stumble into the passenger seat. Sweet let them wait. He looked all around, at the woods, the sky, down the road in the direction they had come, and then the other way, where they were headed. Somewhere out there, Barstow McCoy and his revenge waited, and I'm going to find them no matter what. Hey guys, that is the end of chapter 14 of the book Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. Guys, I love this book. You know, I'm a heckler for reading. A lot of times I got stuff to do. I'm reading something else. Guys, it is my pleasure sharing this with you. I hope Sweet does not find I hope Sweet does not find Barstow and McCoy. And I hope Barstow does not steal McCoy's money because that is going to be another problem. But anywho, we are going to come back here tomorrow morning. I'll be reading for you tomorrow morning before I go to work. Yeah, so if you are not able to join in the live while I'm reading, you will be able to listen to it later on in the day. Yes. And so with this coming to an end, I want to say thanks to everybody who has come in and listened to the reading. If you have enjoyed the reading, tell me in the chat if you have a book on your mind that you would like for me to read. Um, I would be happy to oblige. And also, guys, somebody suggested that um, because I do support small businesses, people who are upcoming, I really do love to support small businesses. I have absolutely no problem doing so. Do you have somebody who has just written a book? I mean, a book that we could read together and try to, you know, decipher it a little bit and see how well it was written for a new writer. Because new writers want to be seen, new writers want to be heard. These old writers like Dorothy Garlock, these people have already made their names and their writing seems to be impeccable and we could all learn from it. I myself am working on my memoir and I learn a lot from reading books like these. But if you have somebody who has written a book, a first time author, I'd be more than happy to read their book, get it out there, and get it onto the ears of people who may not otherwise have heard it. All right. All right. And with that being said, this is going to be the end of the live for today. I thank you all so much for coming in. If you enjoyed the reading, let me know in the comments below. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for coming. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. And if you are new here and you've not yet hit that subscribe button, now is a great time to do so. And to all my returning travelers, I want to say thank you for your continued support. Joseph said you can be reading for me 365 nonstop. It's my absolute pleasure, my love. It's my absolute pleasure. All right, guys. So you all go ahead, cook your Sunday dinner, have yourselves a great day, and we will meet up again later. Later. You are very welcome. Cad and Joseph and my cousin Rambo in the house. AG is here. AG, what's up? AG, what's up, my darling? Was here. Marlon World Reality was here as well. And also Yard Foods was here. Winsome was here. My dear Overton was here. Shadeen was here as well. Several people were here today. Ricky was here as well, and several others. Guys, hit the like button. Don't forget to hit the like button. If you didn't hit it on your way in, hit it on your way out. Tomorrow we'll move on to chapter 15 of this book. Twice. This is Trev from Essence, where your journey matters. Have yourselves a great day, guys.